George Knapp is an Emmy-winning commentator and investigative reporter at KLAS-TV in Las Vegas. He has won dozens of national and regional journalism awards, including recognition for his 1989 documentary, UFOs, The Best Evidence. That program introduced the world to Bob Lazar and his allegations of alien technology at Nevada's Area 51. Knapp's other UFO research efforts include groundbreaking work in the former Soviet Union. Those works have been profiled by CBS News, ABC News, NBC News, the BBC, and numerous other national and international news organizations. Please give a great MUFON Los Angeles welcome to George Knapp.
If I brought enough stuff here. I am absolutely amazed how many people would come out on a weeknight to learn about this topic when there are obviously a lot of things you could be doing, and I'm sure a lot of you have family members and friends who think you're crazy to be coming to learn about a topic that most of the world, most of the official world at least, considers to be absolutely nuts. But hopefully tonight we'll have a little bit of fun. We're certainly going to cover a lot of ground, or at least try to. Got a lot of video to look at. And I can almost guarantee that your butts are going to get sore before we run out of stuff to talk about. I got a letter not too long ago from CSICOP, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. You know those folks, Phil Klass's group. We all know who they are and what they represent. It was a fundraising letter. Because I subscribe to the Skeptical Inquirer, they're always asking me for money, about 4 or 5 times a year. And this letter was asking for a contribution based on a letter that had been sent to CSICOP, and here's the letter that they say was sent to them. Dear CSICOP, I was hoping you could send me facts about aliens. I am doing a project on OFO. I am 14 years old and live in Louisville. I was convinced that I was an alien when I was a child. My family told me I was put in their home by some government, and they get paid to keep me. My sister says I am part of some big government experiment to see if aliens can be like humans. I guess that's why I'm such a believer. The CSICOP writer then intones how this letter struck such a chord with those compassionate souls back east there at CSICOP headquarters, and I found myself imagining how it would make a powerful infomercial for this group if they could only land Sally Struthers to do it, you know. The letter went on to decry the upsurge in such television programs as The X-Files and Sightings, and that influential film that's now a TV series, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It scoffed at the power of prayer, at public officials who rely on astrologers, at government research into remote viewing, and how these expenditures somehow endanger Medicare and things like that. Only they could be so dense to think that the public accepts Buffy the Vampire Slayer as the intellectual equivalent of a National Geographic documentary. The fact is that regular people, like you and I, know the difference between a news program and a movie or a sitcom. No one I know prays to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I almost wish CSICOP was right to an extent. I wish there was this huge segment of the population, a much larger segment of the population, that did take the time to think about the UFO question in serious terms, but that is not the case, not really, and I think the reason for it is kind of all around us. Ufology likes to label itself as an emerging science. We hear that all the time. I think it was the theme of one of MUFON's conferences a couple of years ago, but it isn't. I mean, I don't think it is, not even close. People like you and I like to come to conferences and gatherings like this looking for answers, but we don't really get them. It kind of reminds me of the Jerry Lewis telethon, you know. Every year he tells us, oh, we're right around the corner. You know, we're right around the corner from that cure. Just keep on coming back. And you know, the next year there really isn't a cure. You know, I think the problem, the roadblock in this sense is ufologists. It's a slightly presumptuous kind of a term. I mean, anybody who wants to be a ufologist is a ufologist. You know, there's no degree to speak of. I've been at this for about 10 years now, a pretty big chunk of my life, but not nearly as long as a lot of people have. The modern UFO era is going on for 50 years or so, and I can't think of hardly any conclusions that we can all agree on. You know, what are these visitors? What do they represent? Where are they from? Why are they here? All the big central questions. We don't agree on those. So much for an emerging science. You know, that what we do have is a lot of bickering, a lot of nastiness, a lot of infighting. The problem, as I said, is ufologists. We have no shortage of semi-important or important-sounding topics, things like we got a face on Mars, we've got a clever little demon named the Chupacabra that only seems to pop up where people speak Spanish, we've got more angels you can shake a stick at, we've got horny reptilian aliens going after our Earth women all over the place. But we don't have a whole heck of a lot of answers. I know a few years ago, Whitley Strieber, who I consider more of a writer and a thinker than a ufologist. I don't think he'd like that term of ufology. He turned his back on the whole field and walked away. I'm glad that he's back speaking and writing about topics and his experiences, but he just got tired of what he was subjected to, and for him it was on an international scale. Jacques Vallée, who in my opinion is probably the most important person to ever take up this topic, did the same thing. He just got burned out on ufology and ufologists, and basically you don't see him at these conferences anymore. There's a newsletter called Saucer Smear, which is just a hoot. If you haven't seen it, it's funny. It chronicles the various UFO catfights of the moment. An issue last year, it mentioned the dispute between a researcher named Robert Todd, who says Roswell mainstay Jesse Marcel was a blowhard who exaggerated his military record and everything else. And Marcel's son, Jesse Jr., writes back to Todd with some non-disguised digs at Todd's personal life, saying, "In the meantime, asshole, why don't you get a bottle of booze, hide under your mommy's bed, and get drunk? You're nothing but a wacko, so go F yourself." You know how many ufologists have wanted to say that to each other, but haven't for one? I mean, you think of Stan Friedman, our mutual friend and colleague, versus Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt. You toss in Carl Flock and some of the lesser Roswell luminaries. These guys hate each other. You think about Phil Klass, there are Phil Klass dartboards. I was amazed the first time I went to a conference and saw that. This is an emerging science. It's a wonder someone hasn't blown a fuse and whipped out an Uzi at one of these gatherings. Now, when it comes to UFOs, it seems to me that people who jump onto bandwagons one way or another often end up with a rusty nail in their butts. There's no shortage of examples. And you can call it disinformation, you can call it infighting or whatever, but we just don't seem to be making a whole heck of a lot of headway. Billy Meyer's amazing photos of those beam ships. I remember seeing them so many years ago before I ever knew anything about this topic. Wow. And some of those early photographs, they looked incredible. They still do. Some of the later photographs clearly looked fake. Well, for people, you're either in one camp or the other. Either they're all fake or they're all real. The truth, however, may be somewhere in between. We forget that there were a lot of other independent witnesses who weren't part of Meyer's cult who saw these beam ships, or at least said they did. You know, we also forget that we had a lot of people that infiltrated his group that had varying motives, journalists included, undercover journalists. Wouldn't be too hard to discredit a slightly kooky one-armed farmer. What about the MJ-12 documents? Same sort of a thing. You know, they're filled with things that just invite criticism. Inconsistencies in the type style and all that stuff that's been criticized. But at the same time, information, intriguing information that really rings true, and that seemingly could not have come from sources other than legitimate inside sources. Gulf Breeze, 3 kinds of viewpoints there. These are real photos of real UFOs, Ed Walters faked the whole thing, or it's the government playing mind games with a gullible public. I don't know whether Ed Walters ever experimented with fake photographs, but I sure strongly suspect that story about the model in a former house of his was bogus. Yet we tend to, you know, we fall in one camp or another. We either throw it out or accept it all. Crop circles. Those early crop circles with the patterns that have not been duplicated by folks, and the changes in the chemical composition of the plants and the soil that can't be duplicated. And yet, even Colin Andrews admits today 75% of all the crop circles he's seeing in England each year are man-made. Individuals and organizations, for whatever reason, muddying the waters again. And the world press, my colleagues in journalism, tend to throw the whole thing out. The Roswell case itself, the alien autopsy film, same thing. Tidbits of information that seem tantalizingly true, and yet you fall into one camp or another and throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's a mess. The truth is, I hate to say this, but I just don't follow this scene as much as I used to. I don't log onto the net to check out the latest rumors. I generally do not attend UFO meetings or conventions anymore. I occasionally produce a story or a commentary in Las Vegas alone, but it's not nearly anything like the previous efforts and documentaries that took almost all of my time. I don't watch sightings anymore unless I'm flipping around the channel and there it is. I don't go through the TV guide at the beginning of the week and circle the things I need about UFOs that I need to tape, which I used to do. I do watch the X-Files, but heck, a lot of people watch the X-Files. The simple fact is I have tried hard to kick my UFO habit. You know, it's not quite cold turkey. It's more like what you'd compare to Nicotrol or a UFO light. I don't mainline the MUFON Journal anymore. I don't sit out in the desert night after night looking for UFOs and strange things in the sky. I don't collect ufologist trading cards anymore. I don't return long-distance calls, as many people have pointed out to me, from people I don't know who just want to talk about UFOs in general, or Waco, or Oklahoma City bombing, or JFK's assassination, or whatever. I don't. It's still an addiction. It always will be, but I find myself devoting a lot more time to having a life, being normal, going to work, having a job, doing stories about things that are important to my community. I still pursue leads about Area 51 once in a while, which we'll talk about tonight. I have been involved in trying to verify the claims and the background of Colonel Corso, which we'll also talk about. I'm also still absorbing mountains of information that we've brought back from not one but 2 trips to Russia. We're back there in '96 again, which we'll also get to tonight. But life, I think, is too short to deal with the Bill Coopers, the New World Order conspiracy nuts, the underground vats of alien parts in bubbling cauldrons, the secret treaties that let aliens abduct us, the paranoid fringe cases, the neo-religious zealots, and all the rest. And unfortunately, in the eyes of everyone else, you and I in this room, we're all those people. We're all nuts. Even the straight arrow, no-nonsense, by-the-book researchers who really want to find the truth, earnest people like yourselves who want to get to the bottom of this, we're all nuts. I had the pleasure of seeing this. This is a Las Vegas publication. You probably can't see it, but they've got on the front page here, it's something of a likeness of me. My head looks even fatter than it does in person, and I'm riding in a flying saucer. And the basic gist of the article is, get out of town. You know, we're tired of this UFO crap. Get out of town. I'm a terrible reporter, and that's enough of that. I haven't done a UFO story in Las Vegas, a series, since February of last year, but I'm the UFO guy. As I suspect each of you have your own circle of friends and family, you're the UFO person in your circle. I empathize with you. I mean, I can't tell you. For me, I'm a public person, so it gets a little bit of a wider hit in Las Vegas. A couple of editorial cartoons in the state's biggest newspaper. One that had me with the first one had me with a butterfly net chasing a flying saucer, and they had one where these. It didn't show me, but it had these alien hitmen who had come to Earth. It was called the Marshmallow Head Chronicles. And I had done a series on abductions, and these alien hitmen were coming to get me because I was spilling the beans, and they had their ray guns looking at 2 gasoline pumps, and they were, yes, of course they are Earthmen, but which one is George Knapp? They were going to rub me out. The media critic, he wrote that, oh, people are rushing home to see my UFO stories, not because they're interested in little green men, but because they want to be there when I go bull goose loony right on the air. I don't need this. I don't need this. I'm trying to have a life. So I have tried to place a little bit of a distance between myself and the field, but still I am working behind the scenes on some topics that I hope will be of mutual interest, and these too have been sullied by various ufologists in this emerging science. Phillip Corso is one of them. You've all heard of him by now, mentioned a couple of times earlier. I think he really is an important new source of information on this topic, one of the highest-ranking UFO whistleblowers ever. Certainly, the only UFO whistleblower that I can think of that ever worked at the White House. Predictably, though, there was some overhyped promotion for his book, and boy, ufologists just couldn't wait to get their knives into him. I first met Phil Corso in 1992, before anybody in the ufology field had ever heard of him, before anybody in the ufology field had ever met him. A friend of mine, his name is Mark Sauter. He's a journalist who now works for a program called American Journal. He was working on a book about POWs, prisoners of war who'd been abandoned after the Korean War, and he ran into Colonel Corso, and in the course of interviewing him about that topic, learned about the UFO stuff. I also got to meet him through Mark Sauter. We were talking about this a book deal at the time. For various reasons, the book was never written, but I continued to have occasional correspondence with him and talk to Colonel Corso. He had asked me to keep quiet about it, about what he had told me, and I did, until the hype about his book started coming out. Well, just before, about a year before that happened, myself and some colleagues went back to see him and got an update on what he'd been up to, got a lot of videotape of him. Subsequently, I've been able to interview him again, and I'm impressed by the guy. For those of you who don't know about his background, he has a long and distinguished military career that is easily verifiable, although there's some of our ufological colleagues who want to dispute it anyway. Got into intelligence work. In 1953, he was assigned to the White House staff of Dwight Eisenhower, worked for 4 years with the National Security Council, was subsequently commander of the Range Battalion at White Sands, New Mexico. He commanded the 1st Nuclear Missile Battalion in Germany, and he served as Inspector General of the 7th Army. But his most interesting assignment came in 1961 when his longtime friend and mentor, Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau, selected Corso to head up the Army's Foreign Technology Division. Trudeau and Corso were virtually inseparable. They trusted each other impeccably, immeasurably. While working under General Trudeau, Corso says he was given the assignment of evaluating and exploiting pieces of alien material, which Corso was told came from a crashed saucer in New Mexico. Among the items he says he saw and handled were a piece of metal with really unique properties. The atoms, he said, were all aligned. He said it had a hardness and strength which could not be duplicated by human technology. He said he saw a charred computer chip. He saw photographs and reports concerning autopsies performed on alien bodies. He was told the autopsies had been conducted in a special facility at Walter Reed Hospital. Corso and Trudeau farmed out this material, they say, to private labs, to government research labs, hinted to them that this had come from some sort of advanced Russian plane that had crashed, although without spelling it out, and told them to go to work and figure out what this stuff was. I have some videotape of Colonel Corso. We can put that first one in here now. This interview was toward the end of last summer.
You're saying these items came from somewhere else? They came from a flying saucer. How do you know that?
Marked in the files as coming from New Mexico.
Roswell.
Yeah, Roswell. Well, I think some came from maybe another crash, but these came from New Mexico and Roswell especially. And General Trudeau gave me the job of working on a program, put these things out, feed them to industry, but there was provisions feeding it. They could have the patents, but they had to feed them out back to us as a competitive edge of the Army and to the American people and the world if necessary. The number one was the integrated circuit. Number two in importance was laser, because I had some laser instruments also. Then fiber optics came out of this. The imaging devices or night viewing devices came from this. Some of the work we did on electromagnetism and the ICBMs and came from this.
Imagine the scientists and technicians and the companies that worked on this stuff are not real happy with your version of it.
No, I haven't heard anything. In fact, I've heard from scientists, at least a dozen of them since then, and they're supporting everything in the book. In fact, George, I've even told you, I think, that I was not interested in seeing UFOs. I was all interested in what was in those UFOs. You know, I told them I'm not interested in seeing something fly in the air, but I like to know what's inside that thing.
Did you physically handle the artifacts from?
Oh yeah, I had them. They were in my possession.
What things did you have? What did you have?
I had an integrated circuit, like the size of a quarter. I had a bunch of wires. Colors would come out of it. I would say wires. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know if they were wires they actually, well, I didn't know what they were. They just were emitting light. I had a piece of metal. Atoms were lined in it. So tough, paper thin, you couldn't break it, bend it, or anything. I had super tenacity fibers. And that was, the atoms were lined in it. You couldn't burn it, you couldn't cut it. And later on, the nearest thing in this world that we found to that was a spider web. There was a spider spins an atomically aligned web.
You know, people say military can't keep a secret. There's no way a secret like this could be kept.
We kept a secret one way. We had to keep the secret for two reasons. One was a climate opinion within our own government, as I said. The other was within our own government we had enemies. We would have been glad to destroy all this on us and to have us as kooks. So what we did, I got the job of going and developing a program, which is discussed in the book how it's done. And through this program, we started feeding it out through industry. But this was not known, not on paper. They went out as normal research and development proposals, not to name something.
Yeah, you didn't put out a report that said there's some alien stuff figured out.
We put our regular research and development proposal that came from somebody's brain. And also this was known among a select few, mostly combat officers head-to-head. It came, we kept this among ourselves, because otherwise we were certain that they would have destroyed our organization, and we had a good organization. General Trudeau pulled it together just a couple of years before. They would have destroyed our organization, labeled us as kooks, and taken our budget away.
Were you and your group ever able to determine where these things are from, why they're here?
No, we were never able to determine. Although one of the remisses of the things that I missed out on, and I say this, and I think the greatest gift God ever gave, we created man in his image. Yeah, we had the greatest artifact that they gave us was those bodies, and we didn't do enough on those. That partially, I can take the blame. I had the money, I had the organization, I had the people to do it, and we didn't go far enough.
Autopsies were done on bodies.
But not enough. We didn't do enough. How they functioned, how their brain functioned. And we came to the conclusion even in those days that these were, the reason most flying saucers have failed is because our conclusion was that this being is part of the guidance system. He's part of that saucer.
Where do you suppose that stuff is now, those reports, those kind of reports?
I have no idea, John. When I left the Army, I was the one who wasn't supposed to see that nothing was stolen from the Army. They were in my file, what happened to them. I've called some friends recently, given some ideas where they might be to try to run them down. But I don't know. You know how the military operates. The burn bag and the microfilm. In those days, we microfilmed a lot of stuff. And we had. I have no idea what happened. Remember, I've been gone almost 40 years now. As I say, people criticize me. They say, well, you're cooking. I tell them, well, I'm in good company. General Marshall, General Trudeau, General MacArthur, Von Braun, Albert, Wilbur Smith from the... I thought, I'm in good company. That's the company I'd rather be in, with those kooks.
So those are all people that knew about this?
They know about all this. I'd rather be in that company than the ones criticizing me.
So the story have been extremely difficult, but proving some of it hasn't been difficult at all. It can certainly be shown he is who he says he is, he worked where he says he worked, and that he was certainly easily qualifies as one of the highest-ranking UFO whistleblowers in history. However, Corso admits there is no paper trail to prove any of the UFO-related research ever took place. He told me in 1996 that it was imperative the information be kept close to the vest so the operation wasn't discredited or co-opted by others in the Pentagon or others in the government. What makes him credible to me is that he's told incredible stories before and has been proven right. I told you that the guy who introduced me to him was investigating a book about POWs. 3 times Colonel Corso has testified before Congress on POW issues, and at the time he made his testimony, the things he was saying seemed absolutely incredible. That we had left men behind, that there had been a secret war underway where we were we were overflying Soviet airspace and our pilots had been shot down. Those things are now a matter of historical record. At the same time, before he was testifying, he was thoroughly checked out by the FBI, by congressional staffers as well. My congressional sources have told me that, and some of my colleagues that have traveled around the country to see former friends and fellow officers of his, that he gets nothing but glowing reviews from everyone. They all confirm that he and General Trudeau were very close, that they kept things close to the vest, and they also have said that Colonel Corso talked about this UFO stuff for many years. So, you know, I tend to give him a lot of leeway. The ufological community, however, does not. Before Corso's book was even out, long before his book was out, ufologists were already taking potshots. There's an English guy named Armand Victorian, and he seems to specialize in these hit pieces. He started putting out stuff that Colonel Corso could be linked to segregationist Strom Thurmond. Wow. Senator Thurmond probably was a segregationist at one point in his political career. He probably had to be to get elected. Doesn't mean he is one now. And as I recall, he's the chairman of Armed Services and has served longer in the United States Senate than any person in American history. So being linked to him I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. Later, critics of Corso complained that Senator Thurmond had turned on him. Now first he was too close to Thurmond, and then they're griping and bitching and moaning because Thurmond was backing away from him. What Thurmond had done is withdraw his foreword to Corso's book. There's a lot of internecine politics behind this, but I'll just tell you, the way that his critics are pointing it is that Thurmond had no idea this was going to be about UFOs. He was shocked, absolutely shocked, when UFOs were mentioned in the book, and that's why he pulled it back. Well, Thurmond knew all about it. His staff knew all about it because people that I know have interviewed him about it before the book came out. What it was is sort of an embarrassment for him when it started getting a whole lot of press, and some of the staff members, some of his senior political advisors, has not been in on the decision to okay that forward for the book, so they had it pulled. Anyway, don't read too much into that. One of the Roswell gurus blew off Corso because he supposedly claimed to be a member of MJ-12. Absolutely untrue. Absolutely untrue. Some articles noted he was part of a secret society, and this is the first one for me, the Shikshinny Knights of Malta. The Shikshinny Knights of Malta, according to columnists from back in the 50s, were ex-military officers who were deeply suspicious of the CIA. Who is it, you know? A recent issue of Saucer Smear notes that Corso is in a legal fight with Hollywood agents. Look at this guy. He's fighting with Hollywood agents. He's in a lawsuit with Hollywood. He's probably the first person to ever come to Hollywood and get in a fight with the studios or agents, isn't he? What isn't known is that Corso, at least the people I know close to him, has basically been robbed. You know, his book was on the bestseller list for 8 weeks, and it's been, you know, all over the place. He's got all kinds of publicity. He's got dime one from the book. He claims that there was, apparently the story that's come out now is that there were a contract that he was shown, but there were pages that weren't in it. So I heard that Mr. Burns, his co-author, is going to be speaking here at some point. You folks, if you're going to attend that thing, you might want to ask him about how that deal worked out, because that's the source of the lawsuit. Phil Klass has just come out with his newsletter. He notes that in the book there are many exaggerations, many errors in Corso's book. There are errors. I happened to see the original manuscript, and while the claims were fantastic and incredible and sensational, a lot of the stuff that turned out in this book was not in that first one. Now, I don't know where it came from, but it didn't come from Colonel Corso, because some of the exaggerations about the impact on technology were not in the first one. Some of the inaccuracies, little picky things that only Phil Klass can dig out, where the headquarters, the 8th Army Air Force really was, what base it was. You know, those are errors, but I don't know where they came from. I will tell you that Colonel Corso, I found him to be a charming and articulate man with a pretty good memory and a feisty spirit. It has been a long time since some of these events happened, so maybe memory could cloud it a bit. Perhaps an overzealous ghostwriter could murk up the waters a little bit. But again, as with crop circles, as with Billy Meyer, as with MJ-12, I caution you not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm not here to tell you that everything that Colonel Corso says is true, but a lot of it rings true, and I consider him to be an important new source of information. So at the worst, keep an open mind in regard to him. Now, the way he's been treated is not something unknown to me, especially in dealing with Area 51, as you might imagine. You talk about your knee-jerk reactions, conspiracies, and disinformation. Area 51 certainly comes to mind. You know, I remember getting to sit in on a preview of the summer blockbuster Independence Day, and we're sitting there and watching the movie, and they get to the point where the president is informed, hey, there really is an Area 51. And this is in Las Vegas, so everybody's pretty hip to this topic. And these guys in front of me are going, see, I told you there's an Area 51. And it's like, you know, why you needed a Hollywood blockbuster to confirm this stuff, I don't know, but it was a humorous moment. You know, today Area 51 is the subject of movies and documentaries and network features and newspaper stories and magazine covers, talk shows, internet chatter, tabloid fantasies, and UFO debates. Popular Science, Popular Mechanics, Aviation Week, the New York Times, the Washington Post, 60 Minutes, NBC, ABC, Larry King, Nippon, the BBC, Italian, German, Australian networks, Entertainment Tonight, Hard Copy, A Current Affair, Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings, Encounters, The Paranormal Borderline, Geraldo, Montel Williams, Art Bell, Chuck Harder, The X-Files, and dozens of less influential media outlets have chronicled the rise of a veritable Area 51 cottage industry, including a research center and a viewer's guide, the Alien, T-shirts and posters and buttons and bumper stickers, videos and satellite images, and even, as we're going to see in a couple of minutes, a Bob Lazar Christmas ornament. Now, ladies and gentlemen, 15 years ago, Groom Lake was not even a burp on our collective radar screen. True, there were some sporadic reports over the years in Las Vegas newspapers about this base out there, along with some oblique references in certain UFO circles. If you recall, Falcon and Condor talked a little bit about a secret base in Nevada, and there was something called the Aquarius document floating around. But few people outside of Nevada or the inner circles of ufology had ever heard of the place. Three things changed that. First, in 1984, the U.S. military initiated the illegal seizure of 89,000 acres of public land around Groom Lake. Just took it and later asked for permission to take it. Second, a UFO researcher named John Lear started touting his belief that alien technology was being stored and tested out there. And third, Bob Lazar admitted his involvement in the secret effort to back engineer alien technology at a facility near Groom Lake. For better or worse, considering how everything has turned out, I was instrumental in bringing all three of those developments to the attention of a larger public. And in light of all the folklore and fantasy and absolute nonsense and profiteering and distortion and invective which have emerged as a result of those initial news reports, I don't think it's exactly an achievement to brag about, but it is mine nonetheless. Concerning UFO allegations, there are some things that we can conclude, I think, with some reasonable certainty. Saucer-shaped craft have been witnessed at or near that facility since the 1950s. More than 24 former or current employees have told me as much over the years. A much smaller number of witnesses claim to have seen alien beings at the base. Odd, glowing craft have been photographed and videotaped in the vicinity of Area 51. That much is true. Last year I did a couple of update stories on Area 51 for anyone in the audience who's not familiar with the base or with Bob Lazar, and maybe we can roll that tape right now.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs.
The interview that launched 1,000 business ventures. Bob Lazar's 1989 claims that he saw flying saucers housed and tested near Groom Lake caused ripples which are still being felt. At least 4 movie projects, dozens of screenplays, a few books, T-shirts and bumper stickers, artwork, a rock band, a Las Vegas bar, a viewer's guide, a research center, countless news reports, even a Bob Lazar Christmas ornament. Not bad for a place that until last year didn't officially exist. The military now admits what the world already knew. It has a, quote, operating location, Lake. But the Pentagon says the base has no name. By denying the place has a name, the Defense Department hopes to stall a lawsuit filed by former workers who claim they were exposed to toxic chemicals there. The lawyer who filed the suit thinks it's ridiculous.
You just can't have black places. You can't have places that don't exist. The government cannot create these secret enclaves in which it and it alone determines what laws will govern.
Despite official denials, the common name for the base has always been Area 51. We recently found this 1967 government map which lists that name. Subsequent maps left the name blank. We also found a 70s newspaper article in which the Pentagon mentions Area 51 by name. What's it called today? High-level sources say the military uses the term score event to refer to it. Who runs the base? The CIA built it for use in the U-2 program. This is rare footage taken from Groom Lake of some early tests. Current warning signs indicate it's an Air Force facility, but all branches of the military have used it, along with most major defense contractors. The common thread has always been EG&G, which has had the contract to operate the facility since the beginning. What goes on there today? Plenty. Highly placed sources say the base employs about 1,800 people. One of their main missions is to evaluate Russian defense systems, equipment that's in the hands of unfriendly nations like Iran and Iraq. Another program at 51 is the stealth helicopter, although the technology isn't far along. As for flying saucers, the military admits it has built these unmanned craft. It may not be a coincidence that the Air Force's only unmanned aerial vehicle squadron is based at Nellis. Whatever's flying around out there still attracts visitors from all over the world.
It's still newsworthy in Europe?
Yes. No, also in Europe, Area 51 is well known.
Look how bright it's getting. Look at it now.
This 1989 home video of a glowing orb above Area 51 is the first, but certainly not the last, taken of odd objects in the Nevada desert. Scientist Bob Lazar said he knew where to set up his camera because he worked at Papoose Lake, south of Groom Lake, but still inside Area 51. Lazar said he saw 9 flying discs of alien origin hidden in hillside hangars.
There were 9 total that I saw, each one being different. Like they had the assortment pack.
Lazar's controversial statement set off a stampede that continues to this day. People come by the busload to Groom Lake to watch the skies.
This is a classic mothership appearance.
Nearby, the rustic town of Rachel became a UFO hotspot. The town's bar and grill became the Little Ailey Inn, whose walls are adorned with alien drawings and poster-sized photos of the base. A full line of UFO merchandise, including videos, T-shirts, antimatter hats, and ET welcome mats, is for sale.
Hordes of people come out here.
Yeah, from all over?
From all over.
Owner Joe Travis has given more interviews than he can remember to news crews from all over the world. This crew from Switzerland, for example, arrived just this week. Public interest remains high, even though the government has seized vantage points once used to peer down on the base. Area 51 is off limits, but people still see weird lights in the sky.
Straight up!
Straight up.
Photos have captured glowing globs, sombrero-shaped craft, dual objects with rows of lights, things which make unusual maneuvers.
If anything, it's increased over the past months. You know, it's just every week, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. People come in and say they have seen this orange globe or orb, whatever you want to call it.
Today, the base is hidden, protected by motion detectors, security forces, and the Groom Mountains, but also by the mountains of legal briefs filed by the Pentagon. A lawsuit by 6 former employees alleges the military endangered workers by illegally disposing of hazardous waste at Area 51. The government has used national security as grounds to stall the suit. It denied the base existed, denied it has a name, even denied having such hazardous materials as jet fuel and car batteries, although both jets and cars have been photographed there, as seen in this previously classified film. President Clinton recently signed an order exempting the base from environmental laws, but the lawyer who filed the suit doesn't think it will matter in the long run.
From the very beginning, the military has adopted an absolutist position in this case, that they and they alone will dictate what information the public receives.
I don't know if you can hear it because of the video problem, but this lawsuit that's going on with the workers who have filed this stuff is maybe as important in the long run, and we're not going to get into it tonight, but maybe as important in the long run as the UFO stuff allegations out there, because the things that the government has done to its own workers, when it could have kept this thing quiet just by taking care of them, giving them medical attention, is absolutely unbelievable. And the things that they have done in court to thwart any kind of scrutiny of just what's going on, you wouldn't believe it. KLAS, at my urging, joined as part of this lawsuit back when it was before a federal judge in Nevada. It has since gone to the Ninth Circuit, where it's been a mixed bag and is going to be appealed to the whole Ninth Circuit, not just a 3-judge panel. But at each step of the way, the government attorneys have been allowed to have behind-the-scenes meetings with the judge at which the other side is not present. And they present something to the judge, and in each of these cases so far, the judge has sided with the idea of government secrecy. I mean, some of it is so incredibly ridiculous. The government says it would endanger national security to reveal that there is gasoline or jet fuel out at that base, at a jet base. I'll tell you, if the Russian spies can't figure that out, then I don't think we have a whole heck of a lot to worry about from them. Anyway, that's a subject for another time. Back to Lazar. I think we can say with some kind of believability that disc-shaped craft have been flying around out there for a long time. Bill Hamilton, who was up here before I was, is one of the guys who's really done some solid work on proving that over the years, and for that deserves a lot of credit. I think it's also true that there are no flying saucers at or near Groom Lake today. There are no alien beings at Area 51. There are no vast underground facilities at the base, nor are there any hangars built into the hillsides of Papoose Lake. 3 witnesses I know of with tied to congressional sources have been to the base in the past 3 years for inspections. I've even briefed them before and after about what to look for, where to go. The hangars are not there. Whether they were ever there or not is a question that we can debate forever, but they're not there now. And plus, I think it would just make no sense for the military to hide aliens or alien technology when millions of people all over the world suspect as much, and thousands of them make the trek into the desert to try to check it out for themselves. Conclusions about Bob Lazar are tougher to reach. People tend to fall into one camp or another, like all these other ufological questions we've been talking about. And they religiously stick to their views, no matter what evidence is presented to the other side. And I will have to admit that I'm a little guilty on that score myself. There are doubters who constantly brag about their diligence in exposing Lazar's lack of credentials, especially his lack of educational credentials. Let me just remind everyone that in the very first report that we ever broadcast about Bob Lazar, we said he cannot prove these credentials. We cannot find a single professor, we can't find a classmate, we can't find a diploma, we can't prove it. So people who, and Stan Friedman, friend of mine, constantly bragging about, I'm the guy who brought down Bob Lazar. It's almost part of Stan's name now. Hi, I'm Stan, the guy who brought down Bob Lazar Friedman. Constantly harangues on this point, and it's the baby with the bathwater thing. If he doesn't have credentials, can't prove he went to school anywhere, throw it all out. Well, I'm not sure that that's how I would treat it. Criticisms of Lazar's story are many, and many are very well deserved. He is lackadaisical about documentation. He is indifferent to whether anyone, including friends of his, believe him or not. He is uncooperative, especially to anyone associated with ufology. In fact, I taped an interview this afternoon before I got on the plane with him, just to have a special greeting to you folks. It was like pulling teeth, but we might see that a little bit later. He seemingly has little interest in helping anyone to prove his story one way or another. There are a lot of gaps. There are a lot of things in his story that don't make sense. But I think a lot of it makes too much sense to just completely dismiss it. For me and for KLAS-TV, when we started out way back when in 1989 working on this stuff, the key to his story was always Los Alamos lab. Did he work at the lab? If he worked at the lab and he worked on classified projects, it at least made sense that he could also be tabbed to work on a program in Nevada. So that's where we started. And I don't know if you know the history of this stuff, but the rigmarole that we went through with the lab lasted several years, and we never really did get solid answers out of him. Proving he ever worked at Los Alamos has just been nearly impossible. At first, they denied that they had ever heard of him before when I contacted them. Later, I produced a copy of the lab phone book that had his name in it, and they just kind of hemmed and hawed. I produced a copy of the Los Alamos newspaper that had him listed as a lab physicist. They kind of hemmed and hawed, still said they had no records. After countless phone calls and letters and a couple of years, I finally got the lab to tell me by phone that they'd found an ID number for him. But that he didn't work for them. He worked for a subcontractor called Kirkmeyer. Kirkmeyer proved to be even less cooperative than Los Alamos. At first, I got a guy on the phone, a supervisor, who told me, yeah, we've got records on Lazar. Yeah, you can have them. Weeks went by. I didn't hear from them, didn't get the records. I keep writing, I keep calling. My letters were unanswered. They refused to take my phone calls. Lazar had told me that Kirkmeyer was a scientific headhunter company. They'd fill technical and scientific jobs at government labs. Surely a company that makes its living by filling these kinds of positions would hang on to records of people that they send out to national labs. But apparently not, because finally Kirkmeyer said, well, we threw those records away. It's too much time. We don't keep them that long. Lazar's critics formally complained, well, he was never at Los Alamos. Now they say even if he was there, well, maybe he's working as a janitor, not on classified stuff. This is the kind of reason that Lazar doesn't like to cooperate with ufologists. He feels that critics would never be satisfied. If he proves he works at the lab, they say it doesn't prove he had a clearance. If he could prove he worked on classified programs, they say it still doesn't prove he was at S4. So if he could prove that, it still wouldn't prove he worked on UFOs. So what's the point, is what he says. For the sake of argument, I think it can be proven that Lazar did work on classified projects in New Mexico. I've interviewed 3 lab employees who remember him, who say he was a physicist and that he worked on classified programs. Joe Vaninetti is the name of one of those guys. He worked at Los Alamos. He's listed in the same lab phone book with Lazar. He later worked on the nuclear testing program in Nevada. He says Lazar is telling the truth. The other 2 employees agree, but they didn't want their names used. Now, what do the critics do with these guys? They ignore him. Well, he doesn't have a diploma, so he couldn't have been there. Was he working at the lab? I say yes. If he did work there in classified programs, it makes sense he went to school somewhere. I know the guy. He's technically a whiz kid. I mean, he amazes everyone who has ever been around him, except for people in ufological circles who prefer to take pot shots. Where did he go to school? I really don't know. I mean, I have said this before since the very beginning. I think it's the weakest part of his story. I have pleaded with him as a friend, Bob, if you're lying about your educational background, you would not be the first person to do it to get a good job. Tell me about it, you can get through it. And he hasn't taken me up on it. I have serious doubts about whether, I mean, just knowing the guy, thinking of him, sitting through classes at MIT, taking tests, writing term papers, I just don't see it. I really don't. But I still am reluctant to, that does not mean I want to toss the whole darn thing out, because there's a lot of other stuff that I think goes in his favor. For example, he knew when and where flights of disc-shaped craft would take place. He took people out there 3 or 4 weeks in a row. They got videotape of it. You just saw some of it. How did he know? I think there's a new book out called Dreamland, if you've read this thing. It's pretty nasty, and we'll talk about that if you want to in the Q&A afterward. But it suggests, well, maybe he was just running around. He was running around in the desert and found it out for himself. John Lear was running around for 20 years on Area 51 stuff. He never saw any of these things. It was Lazar who took him out there, told him what night they were going to take place and where they could see him from. And he did it again and again. How did he know? He was also familiar with small details about the operation of Area 51, that EG&G was the prime contractor, because that's where he said he was interviewed, that they interviews employees at their particular building, that special planes fly the employees into Groom Lake, and the buses with blacked out windows are also used. All that is true. We all know that stuff now, but we didn't know it before Bob Lazar said this stuff on air. The an electrical engineer that I met who worked at Area 51, who is now part of this lawsuit, arranged to meet with Lazar for a couple of hours, asked him a series of questions which would have tripped up someone who had never been out there, just minuscule kind of things. Where do the employees eat? How do you pay for your meals? That sort of thing, what the cafeteria looked like. And the engineer said he was convinced that Lazar had been there. Other people now say that they've run the same kind of tests on Lazar and that he failed completely. I don't know. I don't know how you explain it. Another thing Lazar knew was the name Mike Thigpen. Mike Thigpen works for something called the Office of Federal Investigations, which conducts background and security checks on people who work at Nellis and the Nevada test site. Funny little thing is, no one had ever heard of the OFI. I hadn't heard of the OFI. Bob had not heard of the OFI. He thought it was an FBI guy who had come to interview him and had ruffled through the papers at his house, and then he remembered something about OFI. The OFI is not even listed in the Las Vegas phone book. But Lazar remembered that Mike Thigpen is the name of this federal agent. We were able to track down this guy Thigpen, find out, yes, there is something called OFI, and yes, they do these kinds of background checks, and yes, this guy works for him. How did he know? Lazar passed a polygraph exam. Now, there's a lot of people who seem to dispute this thing. They say it was inconclusive. This book, for one, that I talked about, it's inconclusive. Well, it's not inconclusive. I first asked him to take this test. He didn't hesitate a bit. We took him to a guy, a polygrapher, who spent all of like 10 minutes getting ready. Now, Bob was nervous about it. He was nervous because there had been threats on his life. Allegedly, there had been one attempt on his life. They had put guns to his head. They had done things to his head. They had shot him up with strange stuff, made him drink strange substances, and he was obviously nervous. Well, this guy, he did 2 tests on him. Wham, bam. The first one he thought, well, he might be deceptive. The second one he said, this is inconclusive. He suggested, the polygrapher suggested, that we try another guy. The guy we tried is a polygrapher named Terry Tavernetti, and he runs a corporate security operation for a major Las Vegas hotel. He's a former Orange County police officer. He's an experienced and licensed polygrapher. He took his time with Bob, got to know him, went through the story, went through the questions, put him through the tests, and he says, and Tavernetti says, to this day, even talking about it, he got chills as he was going through the test because he realized this guy is not lying. Bob Lazar passed that test. Tavernetti gave in fact, he passed 4 of them. Tavernetti gave the results to another polygrapher who agreed, no question, there's no deceit. Another guy, they passed it on just as a double check, and the guy said, well, maybe he's relating something that someone else told him. Just as a maybe. And then someone else said, maybe we should have more tests, a 4th polygrapher. But the guy who did the tests, 4 of them, said he passed. People blow that off. The people who don't want to hear it blow it off. I don't think it's fair to do so. One of the most obvious problems of Bob's background is his involvement with illegal prostitution. You know, the highest profile witness and the highest profile story you've ever done comes to you and says, oh, by the way, I'm involved in an illegal brothel, and coincidence has it, it's right down the street from your house. Well, only Lazar could pull something like this, you know? And my professional life flashed before my eyes, and I'm trying to think what to do. I said, we've got to do this story. Now, someone's going to find this out. We have got to do it. We've got to go on the air. You've got to admit it. And I really screwed him is what I did, because he trusted me enough to go ahead and do it. As Bob tells the story, there were some undercover police officers who knew about this, who had been involved with this hooker who was running this thing, a woman who, by the way, had been a prostitute since she was 12 years old, but who somehow had been corrupted by Bob Lazar. Anyway, the police were involved, and I called some cops. I said, this is going to come out. Some of your guys know about it. We don't have to do that part of it. Deal? Apparently not, because when it went on the air, cops raided the place, busted Bob, big stink. Of course, all my journalism colleagues in Las Vegas just loved this story. They never gave any attention to Bob Lazar whatsoever until he got into trouble, and they could stick it to me. You know, so this is kind of a mess, and I've tried to figure out how I would react if I weren't so intimately involved with the story. And I guess, you know, I could say that suffice to say, he went public with his involvement. We all know smart people who've done dumb things. You know, if Einstein had been busted for drunk driving, I don't think it would mean the theory of relativity is thrown out the window. There's no question that Lazar violated the law. That doesn't mean he never worked for the government. Anyone who knows him knows that he is a rebel. He is a yeah. I just realized what I said there. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Forget who I'm talking to. I mean, anyone who knows this guy knows that he is a rebel, he's a loner, he is an anti-authority guy, he has a penchant for racing jet cars on city streets, he fires off machine guns, he stages these outlaw fireworks shows every year in the desert that are a real hoot, he likes hookers. This is all true. On his house, he has a pirate skull and crossbones flag over his house. This is the kind of guy he is. So it is not unusual to say that he could get involved in something like this. Why would the Navy hire somebody like that for a secret program? One possible answer comes to mind. A lot of his critics don't like it, but if it fits, you wear it. I mean, he might have been the kind of person they were looking for, someone who was technically qualified, but who could be discredited if necessary. Or maybe the discrediting the thing was the whole purpose all the way along. That was what they had in mind as a way to discredit the whole idea of UFOs at Area 51 or anywhere else. The other telling point about the prostitution thing hit me when I was reading some of the court records on his case. He was originally facing 6 felony counts. Not a whole lot of people get hit with 6 felonies for prostitution in Las Vegas. In fact, no one. But the parole and probation people really wanted him to do hard time. I mean, he was looking at up to 60 years in prison. They didn't like him because in his interview with them and the information he was giving, he was telling them the same story he has told you or I, where he went to school, where he worked, and they couldn't verify it. They were mad because they couldn't verify it. Welcome to the club. When the judge sentenced Lazar, he noted that the court had had a lot of trouble verifying Bob's background. I mean, Bob claimed on these papers that he'd worked for the Navy out there at a place called S4. If he were a phony, if he was running a con, a UFO con, or cashing in, that was the time to come clean. Because if they could prove that he was lying, he was going to do some serious hard time. He didn't. He stuck to the same story. We got a letter introduced into court from Congressman Jim Bilbray, whose office had been helping me all the way along trying to get records about Bob and his background. And the congressman's letter clearly stated this is one of the strangest cases their office had ever dealt with, and all the agencies it had contacted for Lazar's records had stalled every step of the way. They hadn't said they didn't have them. We're looking for them. Still looking. There's also the whole thing about the W-2 form and the controversy. I don't think we need to get into that, but I'll tell you that there's some weird stuff that happened with that W-2. I had originally got him to request it. Months and months went by, and all of a sudden it showed up. Some other people, John Andrews and others, have done some tracking. There's pretty good indication that this was a government employer number on there that's no longer used. The IRS's official version is, well, we really can't tell if we've ever used that employer number or not. I mean, they can tell you what you had for lunch last December, and they don't know if the government has ever used this employment number or not. So, you know, the story told by Bob is consistent with the stories told by a lot of other people dating back almost 40 years, consistent with a lot of what we know about Roswell and other alleged crashes. If you take Lazar out of the Area 51 story, it's still a story. There are too many other witnesses who have claimed knowledge of the program, but if you keep him in the story, and if you can discredit him, you cut a wide swath across all ufology. You cast doubt on the crash saucer theory. You forever wipe out the silly rumor about UFOs in the Nevada desert. You get in a shot at MJ-12 and the secret government while you're at it, and you scare the dickens out of anyone else who might be willing to come forward and talk about secret programs that they've worked on, which is exactly how Lazar's legal troubles have been interpreted by other people who work on those kinds of projects in Nevada. And I know because they've told me. And in this sense, the people who suspect the Area 51 story to be disinformation may be partially correct. But if so, the disinformation didn't originate with Bob. It didn't originate with John Lear, as some have suggested. By picking Bob for this program and letting him see these documents and messing with his mind, they had a perfectly built-in safety valve. Discredit him, you give the mainstream press another reason to vilify UFOs. You give various UFO luminaries an excuse to attack it as well. You give the lunatic fringe something to embrace and embellish, which they have done with great vigor at Area 51. You know, the milk carton kids are all taken out there now for secret experiments. And you almost guarantee that no official in his right mind will ever get anywhere near this mess to find out what's really going on. Anyway, we're going to move on now, and I don't have a comfortable transition. Oh, wait a second. We have another tape. This is something I taped a while back about Bob Lazar. You know all the rumors that people tell about him. He's dead. He's running a drug lab. I asked him to put this on tape and let you know that he's okay. He's alive and well and live in Las Vegas, and here it goes.
I've been underground. People have been hiding me out, shifting from hideout to hideout, and the government's been on my tail. I've been killed. You've been killed. You name it. I've heard unbelievable stories. Radiation detection is one of the things that I spend my time with, and I design, repair, and sell different types of radiation detectors. In fact, one of the things people thought I did was develop film badges. I don't know where they came up with that idea, but I don't do that. The main problem I have with the UFO community is number one, here are people that essentially their income is derived from UFOs. And that's the number one thing I have problems with. So essentially for them to make money and support themselves, they have to come up with ridiculous stories, or at least prove that they're at the forefront of knowledge. You're dealing with a bunch of people that are essentially a collection of psychics, astrologers, people that believe every other person on the earth is an alien, that there's reptilians and all these different species that live underground, aliens that walk around the street and just hassle people to annoy them. Believe me, I'm not part of that. I don't deal with those people, and that's essentially what happened with Jacques Vallée when he came down here. Wanted to know the UFO story. He came down with his movie producers, and his theory has been spacecraft are from other dimensions and things like that, and I essentially laid it out. Well, this is essentially what I was exposed to, and how the crafts work and things like that. It has nothing to do with other dimensions, and ever since then, Jacques hasn't had a very high opinion of me. But that's essentially carried throughout the UFO community. If you contradict what they say, again, they make their income off of something like that, so they have to be the ones that know what's going on.
A lot of attacks on you personally, a lot of attacks on the story, a lot of disbelief, media people, UFO people. You stick by the story here now. You've had it's been a couple of years.
Absolutely, it's coming up on 4 years. That's what happened.
It's interesting that nobody from the military, nobody representing Nellis or any of those folks have ever said anything about it.
They probably can't. Well, there hasn't been much word officially on it at all. In fact, I don't think there's been much word officially as far as denial. They just say they have no comment.
Right. Any progress over the last ensuing couple of years in verifying parts of your background? Are you still actively pursuing that?
No, I don't actively pursue that at all. People think I'm essentially a researcher, chase UFO stories or gather information. I have nothing whatsoever to do with it. Now, before I became involved in the project, I was one of the greatest disbelievers on Earth. I mean, I'm sure I could have topped Phil class. I would have had nothing to do with it. And essentially, other than the equipment and technology that I was exposed to, I really don't carry my beliefs much further than that.
You think those UFOs or those flying saucers or the discs, the equipment that you said you saw, are still out there?
I doubt that equipment is still there. There's been so much coverage. There are so many people looking into that area, and civilian and otherwise, that they had ample time to move things. And where it is, I don't know, but I find it difficult to believe that anything is still going on there.
Okay, go right
You know about the new one, right? Apparently you, I, John Lear are all Shriners or 32nd level Masons, whoever they are. There are no aliens. That it is the Shriners that actually have the flying saucer technology, and we came up with the alien story to confuse the public, and I don't remember the rest of the story, but it's really exciting.
That's the end of the tape. So next time you go to a parade and you see the Shriners in those funny hats and little cars, I don't know whether we should take a break now. Do you need a break, or you want to keep going? Keep going. Keep going. I think the message oozing out of Groom Lake and the Bob Lazar story is, for me at least, not only the UFO angle, but the lawsuit angle is that no matter how much world conditions change, the Berlin Wall falls, communism fails, the Soviet Union collapses, we have no strategic enemy anymore. No matter how much that changes, the military mindset is not going to change, because each year they've done more and more to increase the security out at Area 51, seized more land, roughed up more people, installed different kinds of security measures, and it's completely unbelievable. I don't know if Bob if Bob is for real 100% or not. I know there are some problems with his story and legitimate questions that have been asked and raised by good researchers, but I just caution you again, like with Phil Corso and the other thing, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because this could be a really important story. As I was saying, the message oozing out of Groom Lake is sort of what led me to start thinking about Russia, because clearly we were not getting any kind of breakthroughs from our government. I know a lot of us hope that someday the government's going to open up the doors and the saucers are in there and go ahead and take a peek, but I don't see it happening. It doesn't, at least from what's happening in Nevada, it doesn't seem to be a trend in that direction. So I started thinking about Russia. In 1993, I was fortunate enough to slip through a window of opportunity in Russia. The political climate was just right, allowing for unprecedented access to previously hidden information about UFOs and a lot of topics. A lot of people were going over there gaining access to classified stuff. I said afterward that after 1993, that first trip, that I feared that the window of opportunity might close, and in 1996 I returned to Russia and my fears were confirmed, although not for the expected reasons. The window, I would say, is not closed all the way, but it's stuck, and I think it's going to take a tremendous effort one way or another to get it to move. I took this most recent trip at the invitation of a British broadcasting crew. They wanted to put together a documentary, and they weren't satisfied with just staying in Moscow. We traveled the length and breadth of the country, and I love Russia, but I'm not sure I'm ready to go back there anytime soon. If you want to cue up the, not D, but E, the E tape. The American CIA funds something called the Foreign Broadcast Information Service. This service monitors foreign newspapers and media reports and then summarizes them for consumption by U.S. intelligence agencies. The FBIS reports are not classified, but they are not widely accessible. Still, there have been some references in Western press and in UFO circles to some of the most interesting incidents that have been summarized by this intelligence gathering service. In 1993, I was unsuccessful in attempts to contact the most important players that were mentioned in some of these cases, but this time around, things worked out, if you want to roll the tape. This distinguished-looking man is named Igor Maltsev, Colonel General Maltsev. For 7 years, he was the chief of staff for the entire Soviet air defense. He was the #1 guy in the entire Russian Air Force. In March of 1990, General Maltsev's forces around Moscow encountered something of high strangeness. Maltsev collected all the data and sent a report to the Kremlin. The events were not reported in Russia for a full year and then were picked up later by the FBIS. To my knowledge, I'm the first American journalist to interview Maltsev about these events. According to his official report, there were more than 100 visual observations of UFOs in the Moscow area on a single night. The air forces were placed on alert, planes were scrambled, the objects were picked up on several radar in the air and on the ground. Warplanes attempted to get close to these things, but they couldn't. The speeds were described as many times greater than any known aircraft. The objects could appear and disappear at will. Now, this is the Russian military that's gathering this information. General Maltsev's report stated, quote, "I'm not a specialist on UFOs, but they seem completely devoid of inertia. They had somehow come to terms with gravity. The movement was without sound, with startling maneuverability. At present time, terrestrial machines could hardly have such capabilities." The original newspaper article about this report in Russia stated that General Maltsev's documents offer, quote, "substantial confirmation that UFOs, piloted by intelligent beings, have been visiting Russia." In our interview, General Maltsev was reluctant to take it much further. He conceded that the remarks attributed to him were accurately reported, that UFOs were truly unknown. He said there's no way that it could be stealth or some other advanced aircraft, but that's as far as he'd go. He said he had no knowledge of any other UFO incidents. He wasn't really interested in pursuing what happened further. Then he conceded that his forces had been given a standing order that UFOs are not to be fired upon because, quote, "they may have tremendous capacities for retaliation." In other words, they could kick our ass, I think. Besides, he says, his planes could not get close enough to do anything even if they wanted to. Now remember, this is the same Russian Air Force that when that guy Roost flew his biplane or whatever it was into the Kremlin, oh, what was it? And they were all upset about that, but they don't care that there's 100 unidentified amazing machines flying over Russia. Don't shoot at them. Maltsev insisted that he was in a position to know just about everything about foreign incursions into Russian airspace. He's the boss. If it happened, he should know about it. Yet he claimed ignorance about a whole raft of other UFO cases, and we're going to roll the tape and take a look at some of them right now. First film you're going to see was something that was kept in a KGB vault for 25 years. It was finally obtained by ABC News with my assistance. The triangular object was spotted by a propaganda film shooting over Latvia in 1968. They estimated it was 7 miles up, so it had to be enormous. They scrambled planes to go after it. Before they got there, though, it went behind a cloud and, quote, disappeared. The resident Russian skeptic said, it's a French weather balloon, and it's true, the French did have weather balloons. Stop it for a second. Pause it. French did have weather balloons like that, but ABC checked, and no such balloons had been launched anywhere near that time period, anywhere in that area. Now you can roll the next one. This next one, May 1982, a military survey team working in the Kola Peninsula saw this spinning object. We slowed it down a little bit so you can get another look at it. I have seen similar drawings from other parts of the world, and to my knowledge, no one has come up with an explanation for that. Anyone got one? Jellyfish. Swamp gas. This next thing you're going to see is a fuzzy kind of a photo that was snapped in the Ural Mountains in 1976. The snapshot, as I said, is kind of fuzzy and doesn't really show much, as so many UFO photos don't, and the hunter later offered a more detailed drawing that he gave to the Russian Ministry of Defense, and that's where the files that I found. The man you're about to see is a decorated Russian pilot, a lieutenant colonel, who said he encountered a UFO and tried to intercept it. He told his superiors that the UFO, there he is, he told his superiors that the UFO shot out a beam of light which disabled his plane. He bailed out and survived and kept his mouth shut for several years. His story was finally told in a UFO magazine in Russia. The photo you're going to see is from Defense Archives. This MiG pilot said he had a mid-air collision with a UFO, which damaged his wing. This next photo is of a brush fire that was taken by 3 Army officers who say the fire was sparked by a UFO that landed and then zoomed away. Not all that spectacular. Next one is 2 schoolboys at a town north of Moscow saw this UFO. They ran home, get a camera, came back, captured a series of 8 really kind of amazing photos. Controllers at the Leningrad airport saw 1, then 2. Stop this for a second. They saw 1, then 2, then 3 unusual objects hovering over a nuclear plant. The reaction and the audio and video was captured on tape and acquired by ABC. Go ahead. I think we have audio here. No? Oh, maybe it's popping up. No audio, huh?
No audio. It's not reading.
Well, I'm sorry about that. I don't know where the audio went. But anyway, what they figured out was these things, whatever they were, they had never seen objects. If you want to stop that. They had never seen objects that could go from 0 to 2,000 miles an hour that fast. I didn't grill General Maltsev about any of these specific cases because it was pretty obvious to me that he wasn't going to tell me anymore. As he said repeatedly, he was in a position to know about this stuff, but he didn't. And so if he was telling the truth, it meant the information was routed elsewhere. If he wasn't being entirely truthful, it might be he had good reasons for not telling me the truth, and as I learned over the next few days of the 96 trip, both possibilities had merit. Following those first FBIS accounts about Maltsev's reports, there were follow-ups with even higher officials. The Deputy Minister of Defense, General Ivan Tretyak, Commander-in-Chief of Air Defense Forces and General of the Army, tried to throw a little cold water on a UFO mini-hysteria after these incidents. He told a newspaper that Maltsev's report was accurate. However, most UFO reports can be explained away as misidentifications. Then he admitted some of the UFOs had been photographed, that they could be seen visually and on ground radar, but not detected on airborne radar. He said if special Russian tracking stations were to be built, chances are the Russians would see a lot more of these objects. And he admitted that there is a standing order for Russian pilots to leave the UFOs alone. We made substantial efforts to get an interview with Minister Tretyak, both by phone during the trip and before. We finally spoke to him by phone, and he told us he'd already spoken about this matter. He couldn't understand why we wanted to ask about it. We said, we need video. We need video, dude. And he said, I'll check with the Ministry of Defense. He did. We called him back. He said that in their opinion, it's not in anyone's best interest to talk about this any further at this time, perhaps in a year or two, which is pretty much where we left it. Now, this is a far different attitude from what I encountered just a couple of years before. And it allowed me to set the stage a little bit what it was like in 1993. Let's go to the next tape. This should be, yeah, this should be F. In 1993, when we went there, things were busting out all over in Russia. I mean, it was an incredible time. Dramatic historical events unfolding everywhere you looked. And the UFO reception we got was much, much different. spring, it's cold, it's nasty, and this is the kind of stuff that we see almost every day. This is in Red Square. Communists are on one side, the people believing in democracy on the other, and there's a whole bunch of cops in between. It was a pretty nasty time. There were clashes between those who supported the reforms, those who longed to return to communism every day. There were mass meetings every day, protests. There were bombings that were never reported here in the West. As you'll see, there are pictures of troops on the move in downtown Moscow. We had come up on the communist side of the demonstration, and they didn't like us one bit. So it was an incredible time to be there. On the day we arrived, Boris Yeltsin had seized control of the broadcast airwaves. On the day we left, their parliament was meeting to impeach him, and all kinds of stuff had gone on in between. A wonderful time to be there, whether or not you're looking for UFOs or not. Today, however, the scene has changed. At least as of last year, no more mass demonstrations, no more open unrest, but things are bad, probably far worse. You can stop the tape now. The gap between rich and poor has grown. Organized crime is virtually out of control over there. The communists have made a comeback. You've got these scary nationalists talking about the return of the USSR. Yeltsin has a very tenuous grip on power. His health is very bad. The Russians don't know what is going to happen from one day to the next, and many are frightened. And I think that was reflected in what we found in searching for UFO stuff. Our success hinged on basically one man. He's a Russian physicist named Dr. Nikolai Kapranov. He had been a national security advisor to the Russian parliament as well as to their Academy of Sciences. I met him in Las Vegas in 1992. Started asking about UFOs, whether he knew anything over there. Nah, never given any thought. And then as we had a beer or two, you know, I do know a guy at KGB who talked about it, and I do know this guy and this guy, so we set him up with an office, said go find it. And the main directive that we gave him, the one that really worked for us, was don't go to ufologists. Not that there's anything wrong with ufologists, but we'd like to find people who are in a position to know about this stuff, but who have never been interviewed before. No one who's been on hard copy, not Marina Popovich or any of these folks who are perfectly good sources of information. We wanted to find something new. And that's exactly, it's because of that rule, I think, it opened a lot of doors for us. In fact, it allowed us to gain access to Ministry of Defense files that no one has ever seen before. Incidents like these. November '89, 3 military pilots in pursuit of a fast-moving UFO were exposed to intense beams of hot light from an object which zoomed away at incredible speed. The pilots were hospitalized, became virtual invalids, and died of symptoms similar to radiation poisoning. June 1980, Moscow, dozens of military personnel observed a bright egg-shaped UFO perform high-speed maneuvers and incredible turns, appearing, disappearing, and hovering. One officer got within 50 meters of an object, but was repelled by something like a force field. Again, this is from the Russian Ministry of Defense classified files. June 1980, the same date, the town of Volsk, 20 witnesses in 7 separate groups reported UFOs, including a luminous sphere that split into 2 objects. One of the 2 hovered over the town, emitting a bright beam of light. Another object flew in a zigzag pattern. Auto engines and radio signals on the ground below were knocked out. The same objects were seen 6 more times over the next 4 months in the same area. But the most dramatic incident of all occurred on the night of October 4th, 1982, over the village of Yusovo in the Soviet Ukraine. Dozens of witnesses, most of them high-ranking military officers, reported a UFO free-for-all in the skies for a period of nearly 4 hours. Some of the objects were triangular, some were elliptical, some changed colors, others changed shapes, some split into smaller objects, some merged into larger objects. They blinked on, blinked off, performed outrageous maneuvers for 4 hours. All of the witnesses' statements were collected, stamped, and classified, and then sent to Moscow with great urgency. And the reason for that is the UFOs were maneuvering over a nuclear missile base, long-range nuclear missiles. Included in the classified report was the most disturbing statement of all, provided by communications commander Davidovich Katzman, who reported that while the UFOs hovered over the missile base, the launch control panel was somehow activated. In his words, it was a spontaneous illumination of all displays, and someone or something entered the precise control codes which enabled the missiles. In other words, the missiles were ready to launch. But then the UFOs disappeared. Control panel went back to normal. An investigation by the Ministry of Defense was launched almost immediately. They came in, took everything apart, they looked at all the other equipment all over the base. No other equipment had been affected. No other equipment had ever been affected like this before. They could find nothing wrong with the control panel. They concluded that UFOs were somehow responsible for what occurred, as if to send a message that perhaps this is your most important and powerful weapon system, but it doesn't impress us all that much. That same message, as you may know, was delivered to the U.S. military in 1975. A series of overflights of U.S. bases along the Canadian border, nuclear missiles, some say the launch codes were interfered with. Now, contrary to what's been said publicly by the governments of the U.S. and Great Britain and Russia and others, UFOs do carry clear implications for national security. However, with the end of the Cold War, we've seen no change in the attitudes of our governments on these topics. For decades, they've justified excessive secrecy under the mantle of national security. They couldn't tell us what's going on, but it's all been for our own good, and now they're still mum on the subject. You want to roll tape. As I said, same one. As I said, working with Nikolai Kapranov opened a lot of doors for us. It's coming up. And probably the most important door that it opened for us was the one that led to the modest apartment of a man named Boris Sokolov. He was a retired Red Army colonel from a distinguished military family. His grandfather had been a personal guard of the Tsar. In the late 70s, Sokolov was one of an elite handful of officers charged with adapting industrial technologies to military purposes. His area of concentration was radio waves and radio astronomy. And as we will learn, the Soviet military had long been monitoring UFO activity, but some spectacular sightings, hold this for just a second, spectacular sightings in the late 70s on the Russian-Finnish border had prompted more direct action, a bigger study. 1978, Colonel Sokolov says, an amazing order was issued by the Soviet Ministry of Defense. It went out to every military unit in the vast Soviet empire, Army, Navy, Air Force, everyone. In Sokolov's words, this order transformed the entire USSR into one gigantic UFO listening post. Simply put, the order said, every UFO sighting, every UFO encounter, every unexplained aerial object, every ball of light, every anomalous object you see has to be fully investigated, the witnesses interrogated, collect all this stuff into a report, and send it to Moscow. And all of that stuff went to the Ministry of Defense and Colonel Sokolov, who was placed in charge of the study. A study like this can never be done again, he says, and there's a good reason for that. One is the USSR, the whole country was involved, it no longer exists. And two, this study lasted for 10 full years. Thousands and thousands of reports poured in. He saw the best, and he shared them with us. Go ahead and roll this tape. We'll hear from Colonel Sokolov why the study had been undertaken in the first place.
The military was interested for three reasons. One, because of the unpredictable movement of the UFOs, the quick changes in course angles. Two, because of the velocity of the UFO movements. And three, because UFOs observed visually could not be seen on radar, and those seen on radar could not always be seen visually. The military thought that if the secrets of the UFOs could be discovered, they would be able to win the competition against our prospective enemies in terms of velocity, materials, and visibility. Stealth. To build their own stealth. Pilots recognized UFOs as a threat to them. There were 40 episodes in which they shot at UFOs. An order was given to pilots to chase UFOs and shoot at them. But when the pilots tried, the UFOs speeded up. In 3 cases, the pilots would lose control and crash. 2 of the pilots died. After that, pilots received a new order. When they see a UFO, change course and get out. All the pilots agreed. October 5th, 1983. I was ordered to immediately go to the Ukraine to an ICBM base. The reason for the urgency was a report from the base commander to the chief of the general staff. On October 4th, from 4 to 8 p.m., the base observed a UFO. At the same time, on the control panel, they received an order to prepare the launch of the ICBMs. The lights lit up, and the launch codes enabled the missiles. Dozens of officers witnessed this.
Colonel Sokolov added somewhat cryptically that the Ministry of Defense study of UFOs is still going on, although on a lesser scale, and that, quote, it's unlike the one in the United States. But he wouldn't say a whole lot more about that. All kinds of fascinating incidents from those files. I brought a lot of them here, but I I can't think of a practical way to show them to everyone. The real significance, I think, though, of the Ministry of Defense file is not in the specifics of the individual cases, but rather in the scope of the overall study. I mean, this was Russia's Pentagon, which had ordered this long-term, comprehensive UFO study for the express purpose of exploiting what they considered to be alien technology. They wanted to build a stealth and kick our butt. We're not talking about ufologists here. We're talking about the Ministry of Defense, and that's very serious stuff. It was vitally important to the crew I was traveling with in 1996 to try to find Colonel Sokolov again. We wanted to interview him. I mean, he was the key witness for what they hoped to be their documentary. And I was curious as well as what had happened to him, because I knew that he had taken a beating in the Russian press after we came back, blabbed our mouths off in some ufological publications about what we had found. It got back to Russian UFO circles, and he took a terrible pounding. There were still communist-oriented newspapers there. There was a particular ufologist who was not interviewed by us and who was kind of miffed about it, who really took off on Colonel Sokolov and on some of the others who had helped us. Nikolai Kapranov, our friend, had told us if this had happened 5 years ago, if this had happened 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we would have been imprisoned. If this had happened 10 years ago, we would have been shot. And I had also heard that Colonel Sokolov had been having health problems, so in our first few attempts to reestablish contact with him, we were told he don't want to talk about UFOs anymore. And he didn't need any more heat, and besides, his health was not that good. Both things turned out to be true. Excuse me. We were never able to talk to him. He avoided us the whole time. We found out later that he had been admitted to a hospital. He is still alive, but not in very good health. Even more telling, though, in this trip, we were unable in 1996 to hook up with Nikolai, who had become something of a friend of mine. We'd been corresponding for a period of 4 years, telephone conversations all the time, working on a real fun project. He wouldn't come to the phone. His family at first said he was gone, and then he just never hooked up. And I don't know to this day what the story was there. The idea that Russians are studying UFOs in order to learn stealth technology was intriguing to me because of the allegations about some kind of connection to stealth and UFOs that have been raised in connection with Area 51. Similar allegations have been raised about a connection to SDI or Star Wars technology, and through our contacts with the Russian Academy of Natural Sciences, we interviewed a man named Dr. Ramily Avramenko, who was and perhaps is still one of the chief scientists working on Russia's anti-satellite weapons program, their version of SDI. He had the highest possible security clearances most of his adult life, so high that for most of his life he wasn't even able to use his real name. If he wanted to publish something scientific, he had to use an alias. Dr. Avramenko told us in no uncertain terms UFOs are real, that we, the Americans meaning, and the Russians have known they're real for decades, and that the information has been incorporated into SDI research. Roll the tape. SDI research. He even demonstrated what he said was a tabletop model of a plasma beam weapon for us, and I didn't think it was all that impressive, but other people. I'd seen this thing, this blue plastic thing sitting on the table, and wondered what it was, and he pulls out the razor blade and puts it on top and gives us a little demonstration. I'm still not sure whether this is significant or not. If there's somebody scientific in the audience, they could tell us, but he showed us what it did. It wasn't plugged into anything either.
It is short.
Well, then he told us about UFOs.
The first time I saw UFOs was in 1959. I saw it with radar as it was orbiting Earth. In 1959, the first good radars were made. We could see several thousand kilometers. We could see what was happening around the Earth. At the time, satellites were easily countable, but we also saw vehicles whose technical characteristics we can't match even now. We saw tens of these in 1959, entering and leaving Earth's atmosphere. Surely the existence of these UFOs caused problems for the U.S. defense system. You were faced with separating aggressive vehicles from the unknowns. Are aliens and UFOs real? For me and my colleagues, that isn't even a question. I know this government has many programs on this. The information about UFOs helps us manufacture plasma beams for use in our Star Wars. The weapons of the aliens, we call them.
Both Dr. Avramenko and Colonel Sokolov told us the military studies of UFOs were still underway. And with the help of Nikolai, the first time around anyway, we met with the man who is still in charge of the ongoing study. We first had an agreement that we wouldn't use his name, but later he gave me the permission to do so, which is kind of incongruous with everything else we saw during the '96 trip. His name is Colonel Alexander Plaxon. He's an Air Force officer. Managed to get copies, with his help and Colonel Sokolov, of documents that are still classified, as opposed to a lot of the other stuff which has been declassified. Documents that are still classified about Russian UFO studies. What they reveal is this is an ongoing effort. It is high level. It is dead serious by the Russian military. In the documents, there are a lot of references to American ufology that makes me believe that they are monitoring developments in ufology around the world. It doesn't mean that they believe it's all real. It just shows that they're paying attention to it. It's not even a matter of discussion whether UFOs are real. Yes, they acknowledge many are misidentifications, but they're focusing on how these things work so they can apply it to military and perhaps later civilian technology. The name of the ongoing study in '93 was Thread 3. One enlightening section of papers dealt with Russian cosmonauts in space, and it also speculated on American astronauts. The Russians seem to think we ran into something on the moon, which is the reason that we didn't go back for so many years. They also detail Yuri Gagarin claimed that he had seen something in space and would speak about it more, his first guy in space, would speak about it more if given permission. The second, according to these documents, the second guy in space, a cosmonaut Titov, took along a film camera, and he had a whole array of these devices that he could see outside the capsule dancing around. He brought back some film footage, and we got to see one frame of that film. It shows 7 brightly lit objects out there. Also in the classified documents, as I said, several references to things that were seen on the moon by U.S. astronauts and how the information had been removed from NASA's public files. We did meet with Colonel Plaxon this time, 1996 again. Thread 3 had ended, but another study called Group 22 had replaced it on a lesser scale. He says that he has not been told to be quiet. He's written even articles about anomalous lights as opposed to, and plasma balls as opposed to UFOs. We wondered how long these studies have been going on. Found another guy, one guy in the country who can answer that question. His name is Valery Budakov. Dr. Budakov has been mentioned subsequently in articles here in the West. He had been trained at, however, before we approached him, I don't think any other Western journalist had talked to him. He'd been trained at the Moscow Institute of Aviation, where the Russian space program was built. You want to know about the idea of crash saucers, whether or not, how the Russians view Roswell? This was a guy who had some answers. We can roll this tape. His mentor was a guy named Korolev, the father of the Russian space program, and he asked him, he come to speak to him about Stalin and UFOs.
Korolev told me that in 1948 he was invited to the Kremlin to see Stalin. This was after the events in New Mexico and after the death of Captain Mantell. Stalin brought Korolev into a room where all the materials were spread on a table. Western periodicals, books, articles, UFO reports from the Soviet Union, information from special channels in the U.S. Stalin wanted to know, what did Korolev think about the material concerning Roswell and UFOs? Korolev asked to take the materials home to study them and was told no. He had to work there. When Korolev finished the work, Stalin asked him again his opinion. Korolev said the phenomenon is real. They do not appear to be dangerous to our country. They are not manufactured in the States or any other country. And the time will come when it must be further studied. Stalin thanked him and said this same opinion was shared by other specialists. We know that the U.S. Air Force possesses plenty of material about UFOs. We know the U.S. Navy also has plenty of material. We know about special orders given to keep all of the material secret. When curious people ask for the materials, they are told they're not there. For the near future, the most interesting materials will be kept secret. The owners of the material don't let it out.
Stop it. Well, that was then. Oh, the guy looks like Carl Malden, though, doesn't he? That was then. This time around, same kind of a story. We met with him again. He was eager to promote a new book that he's got that he wanted promoted in the West, but he had a totally different view about Roswell. Make that views. Actually, he had several of them. He said it might have been a saucer, but it was man-made by former Nazi scientists that we had down there in New Mexico. He said the Russians had done the same thing. He said more likely it might have been a V-2 missile from White Sands, that it was carrying green monkeys, not alien bodies. It was just a totally different attitude from the last time we had seen him, and it remains very curious to me. You know, American debunkers have provided air cover for scientists who don't want to study UFOs by poo-pooing the entire subject without the benefit of doing a lot of research. We found our Russian expedition proved, I think, beyond any doubt that such a position is morally and scientifically bankrupt. We're going to roll the tape again. We had the opportunity to meet with Russia's premier skeptic, a scientist named Yuli Platov. He works at something called the Institute for Terrestrial Magnetism within the Russian Academy of Sciences. That's him. Dr. Platov informed us of the history of official UFO studies in Russia. He says the National Academy of Sciences there began formal studies in the 70s, that 10 different scientific institutions were involved, that thousands of case files had been compiled, along with photos and drawings like these, and there is general agreement that the topic is worthy of study. In our 1993 meeting, he showed us a bunch of this stuff. He said he was a friendly skeptic. By that, he agrees that 90% of UFO sightings are probably misidentifications, but he said that they're not fully explainable, and it doesn't rule out the possibility of extraterrestrial visitations. Some of the photos he had were pretty good. One case in particular had been reported in the West here. Some witnesses had seen a UFO land on a frozen lake and take off. They left behind this large circular formation on the ice, sort of a Russian version of crop circles, I guess. Hard evidence, if you will. The case remained unexplained as far as Platov was concerned. He also mentioned that Russians had seen dozens of standard-type crop circles, you can stop it, over the years. And he summed up his attitude by saying that science should be interested in pursuing the unexplained, that the prospect of ET life is very important, but that we must follow the evidence where it leads, even if it gets into some really weird territory, which is the kind of response you'd like from our scientists, you know, who won't touch this thing because they say there's nothing to study. This time around, we met with Dr. Platov again, and as with Dr. Budikov, the attitude has changed. He had gone from a friendly skeptic to an absolute Phil-class arch skeptic. There are no cases but one that is legitimately unexplained, he said. We would show him tape and show him files of things, and he would brush them off with a wave of his hand. And I can't explain the change of heart. There are other scientists, though. I know you're getting tired of these Russian names. I'll zip through them. There's a guy named Professor Rem Varlamov, if you want to roll tape, one of the founders of Russian ufology, currently teaching at the Moscow Institute of Technology. He talked to us because he's a specialist in landing site trace cases.
The thrust of our work is not to contact the space intellect, but to understand how the universe works. We wanted to answer 3 questions. 1, do other worlds and dimensions exist? We have measured 22 physical constants to suggest the answer is yes. 2, do our laws of physics exist in those worlds? No, they don't, and the differences can be documented. 3, can we contact this other intelligence? The answer is yes, but we must be careful. We discovered many measurable characteristics within the landing sites. The plants inside these circles, or impressions, were greatly changed. Plants which were inside the circles contained 20 to 30% more phosphorus and carbon, and they grew at a slower rate. We studied 40 elements in the soil through spectrography. 20 of those elements were found in concentrations 20 to 60 times higher inside the circles than outside. Lead was found to be 14 times as concentrated. Titanium, 8.5 times. Cobalt, barium, and zinc, 3 to 4 times. We also documented physical and psychological effects. Inside the circle, heart rates and blood flow were 60% higher. Our testing equipment also was affected at times. We conducted an experiment to see if the measurement of time might be affected by the energy inside the landing sites. We used both mechanical and crystal timepieces, which were synchronized, then placed both inside and outside of the sites. What we found were that after 2 hours inside the landing sites, time speeded up. The timepieces were no longer synchronized.
Fascinating. I mean, measurable differences in the elements and things like that, doing stuff that scientists are supposed to do. not going into something with a preconceived idea. You dig in the soil, you test stuff, you put it under a microscope, and you see what you see. He talked about a whole range of fascinating experiments that they had done. He even had a sample of angel hair at one point, a sort of exhaust product, and had some test results from that. He said that there had been at least 6 attempts to make prearranged contacts with alien intelligence, successful to some degree, I think along the lines of some of the stuff that Dr. Greer and CSETI folks had been doing. Varlamov is not alone as a specialist in landing site trace cases. There's another guy I'd been working with for about 30 years. He's a government biologist. He has recognized some truly amazing phenomena. His name is Dr. Yuri Simikov. He specializes in measuring single-cell organisms in the soil at places where witnesses say UFOs have set down. Go ahead and roll this tape. The soil teems with microscopic life outside these circles. Inside, it's just barren. That's one of the findings. But he also was able to find something that was pretty amazing at one of these landing sites. Actually, these items were found at 2 alleged sites, hundreds of miles apart, years removed from each other. What he found in the soil were these tiny, colorful balls or spheres of unknown origin. Neither Simikov nor anyone else could figure out what they were. He says they contained the building blocks of life, and that when placed in water, they opened up like seed pods. We joke that they were like cosmic sperm, and I'll tell you about smuggling half the world's supply of cosmic sperm through customs sometime. Here he is talking about some of the microscopic organisms.
The single-cell organisms simply leave the sites. They disappear. They don't die. It's as if they were forced to leave the sites. We also experimented with insects. Insects have different receptors than we do. I suspect insects can feel fields not known to us, or fields that are slightly varied. When we placed flies in a dish and put the dish over the landing site, the flies went wild, buzzing and flying around. The balls, I can't find any evidence of their existence in any printed material. They may be formed as a result of transmutation, when oxygen was transformed into sodium under the influence of the UFO. Or maybe they are containers to carry life from one planet to another. Still, the objects are not known. One more thing, at the spots where I found the balls, the flies we used in our experiments not only went wild, but were killed. And mosquitoes could be found outside the landing site, but not inside.
He gave me half of the world's known supply of cosmic sperm, and we brought it back and have had a series of tests done on it, and over the course of the years, I still can't tell you what it is. It doesn't open up like seed pods. We couldn't get the one plant pathology lab to duplicate that. Dr. W.C. Levengood, if you know him from Crop Circle Research, he's taken a look at them, and he says they are, whatever they are optically perfect. They are perfect little spheres, appear to be glass-like in composition, although the chemical composition is a little bit strange. He says they're 5 times larger than any kind of similar spheres that he's ever seen made, and he worked for a glass company for 15 years. Spheres that are made like that on Earth here are used as chemical catalysts, I was told, but he can't figure out, he says, if somebody made them, and I don't know how the heck they did, if somebody made them, they had to have a very good reason. It could be very expensive and very difficult to do it. And why it was out in the middle of Kazakhstan and the middle of dirt piles outside of Moscow and the soil samples, no one can answer. I know I'm going kind of fast on this, but I wanted to cover one more point. The question of other Roswells and other crashes. Those kinds of stories had been floating around for a number of years. You want to switch tapes to the next one. In Russia as well as in America, we heard several of them, but the best one was in a place called Dalnogorsk on the other side of Russia. We took a 9.5-hour flight to get there, which was an adventure in itself, and this is a report that I produced when I got back that sort of showed what we found.
Leaving 3 people dead. We'll tell you what happened.
And our own George Knapp goes to Russia in search of UFOs.
It's the loudest tease anyone's ever done.
UFO believers have argued for years about the Roswell incident, where a supposed flying saucer crashed in New Mexico. Now they have something new to debate, the Russian Roswell. George Knapp investigated the case during his recent trip to Russia.
From the port city of Vladivostok, an aging helicopter took us to the even more remote town of Dalnogorsk, known for its mines, its chemical plants, and the crash on Hill 611. In January 1986, hundreds of witnesses saw a round, red, glowing object before and during the crash. It flew parallel to the mountains, they say, then plunged into the ground, repeatedly bouncing up and down. Valery Dezhilny of the Russian Academy of Sciences was the first to reach the crash site. On the rocks and trees, he found metal fragments unlike those of any meteorite. Under examination, the debris revealed a complex pattern of netting. Most of the material was sent to Academy Institutes for analysis. The debris included several rare earth elements, but no trace of sulfur or phosphorus used in normal industrial processes. Dezhilny also found that flint at the crash site had somehow been magnetized. Something as likely as magnetizing brick, he says. His team report concluded outrageously the object was not made on Earth. The prevailing view among skeptics is that the object was a secret Russian satellite. However, the 11 institutes which studied the debris have never formally released their findings or the material. Military sources, including this lieutenant colonel, say there are no records indicating it was a Russian satellite. Dezhilny also notes that no one from the government ever came looking for their lost satellite, although the KGB office in Dalnogorsk did inquire about subsequent UFO sightings. Dozens of UFOs were seen in the weeks and months after the crash, objects which flashed spotlights toward the ground as if searching for something. Most residents saw them, and the general in charge of the Russian Air Force in the region said on television his forces had tracked some of the objects on radar. As in the U.S., there have been other debatable crash reports in Russia, but none with hundreds of living eyewitnesses and none with several pounds of unusual material. George Knapp, Channel 8 Eyewitness News.
This is a note of protocol. I told you it was a 9.5-hour flight from Moscow to Vladivostok, the most crime-ridden city in all of Russia. We flew out in the same storm system that killed Ron Brown, the Secretary of Commerce, hundreds of miles down to the south, but it's a complete whiteout. It was just nuts. 9.5 hours. They served us a dinner. It was chicken and rice and white wine. And then for breakfast, we're still on the plane. 9 hours later, they served us chicken and rice and red wine. So, just as a matter of, if you want to be couth in Russia, it's red wine with breakfast. Anyway, that was a fascinating trip. Dalnogorsk, a real garden spot up there next to North Korea and China, and north of Vladivostok. It was quite an experience. I'm not quite ready to go back. Try to summarize this stuff. You know, we were there in '93. And all the doors were open for us, and people were openly speaking about this. And in '96, without anyone telling them, it seemed like the pendulum had swung the other way, and people were, without any formal orders, and people were clamming up about UFOs, or they were singing a different tune. You know, when we were there in '96, Boris Yeltsin was, when we first got there, he was 20 points behind in the polls to his opponent. People were concerned that communists might return to power, so maybe their reluctance to get into any kind of stew was understandable. Boris Yeltsin won, but his health and his grip on power are very tentative, so that window of opportunity remains stuck. I think what we learned, though, is governments do know about UFOs. They are interested in them. They do share information. They do cooperate in a cover-up, probably out of their own desire for self-preservation. We know they're lying to us. We know that the Russian government is lying to the Russians, and the British government is lying to the British, and the American government is lying to us. And we look forward to the day when they publicly admit it, but I wouldn't hold our breath. I would just caution you, if I could say we learned anything here, I hope I've imparted, is that with this wild and wacky topic, you got to be skeptical. You have to be skeptical. But try to keep at least an open mind and a healthy kind of skepticism, and don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Thanks very much for having me here.